Hello everyone, this is Fire Chief Paul Dow with Albuquerque Fire Rescue. Now this podcast is designed to bring you helpful training and best practices and some additional resources that you can access from anywhere. So thank you for joining us and enjoy today's episode.
Welcome. Good afternoon. Welcome to another exciting podcast. We have a special one for you today. We have two guests and a new set, so I think you guys will enjoy this today. With us and revisiting, hi Jen, we have Jenn Rogers. She's an early childhood specialist, and our additional guest today is Bailey Grundhoffer. Did I brutalize that?
No, not at all.
She's a social worker. They are both with the Public Safety Psychology Group, or PSPG, located here in good old Albuquerque, New Mexico. Of course, I'll be your host today. I'm Lieutenant John McGee with Albuquerque Fire Rescue, and welcome. So, hi ladies. How you guys doing?
Good, thanks.
Good. So today, we're a pretty heavy topic, but I'm hoping that we'll be able to get some good knowledge out of this and some understanding. We're going to talk about child behavioral interventions. And when I read that title, it's quite a mouthful.
Absolutely.
Intervention. So let's establish some baseline, right? Is this an important topic?
Absolutely.
I knew you were going to say that.
Anything with kids is, right?
And why? Why are we talking about? Because, you know, people have been raising children for a long time, and we turned out okay, right? They raised me. I'm all right.
Yep.
So do we need help?
I think the misconception always is that you have a kiddo and then they just kind of know what to do, right? That they raise themselves. And for our kind of generations and previous, we kind of did, because we could go outside and we kind of stumbled through things. But that's not the case anymore. And so there's so many different avenues where we can misguide things or things go wrong, that we need to help a lot more, I think, than we used to.
So let me see if I can paraphrase what you're saying. So, all right, we have children and we're raising them, and we are met with challenges, or even what we, I have it in my notes here, we were going to talk about misbehavior. And what is it? Because what misbehavior for me is going to be different for you, right? I might allow them to hang from the ceilings, right? But that might not fly in your home. So is some of that based on interpretation? What I interpret as misbehavior?
Yeah, and I think stuff changes society-wise over the years too, right? I mean, what we thought 20, 30, 40 years ago, even we were just talking about words, are appropriate, not appropriate. Things change, and some of that is society driven, and some of it is family driven. And so part of our job as parents is to guide our kids to understand what's acceptable, both in public and also privately in our homes.
But your job as an early childhood specialist, so you teach people like me strategies, right, of how to correct the children, but in a way that doesn't traumatize them. Is that fair to say? All right. So why can't I just discipline them the same way my parents disciplined me?
Because we know better now.
Do we?
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah. So this is gonna be a good one.
Okay.
Because, and let's just jump right into it. So now I think we'll start broad, and then we can narrow down and talk about some specific things, but just broadly. And I want to hear from both of you. Spanking, or what some people call corporal punishment. Should we do that?
Yeah, so one of the things that we know now, and we know things over time, right? And what we're talking about right now may be different 5 years from now. And I think that's something that Jen and I both take very seriously, that we're constantly researching and sending each other articles, because there's constantly new things out, even from a couple years ago when we started talking about this. So what we know right now in this moment is that this idea of fear isn't what always should drive us. So if I'm afraid of somebody and I operate based off of fear, I may do something really, really well, but I'm not doing it because I actually want to do it and because I understand why. I'm doing it out of fear instead. That isn't always a bad thing, right? But if we can change the difference between somebody understanding what the expectation is versus I fear you, so I'm not going to do that just out of fear. And we have a higher chance of success, right? That 10, 15 years down the road, our kid does something based off of their own internal drive instead of just, I'm afraid of doing this. And so they're more likely to make what we call a choice based on evidence, right? And that's a lot of when we're teaching kids, we tell them, we're here to give you the information so you can make an informed choice with evidence. With the choice you make after this, a lot of that's in your control, but here's what we know now, and here's your informed choice. So if I, for example, don't want a kid to do something, and I say, here's why I don't want you to do it, and here's the consequence should you do this.
So there should be consequences. When you were saying that, I was just thinking, I don't know, I get this crazy vision in my head, this little kid running through the grocery store, and he's in the cereal aisle, and he's just knocking boxes off, and mom's chasing him, negotiating with him to stop. It's not working. Now, every other person in that building would say, I know what he needs, and I'll go over there and give it to him if she needs me to, right? Give him a little swat on the butt. In that scenario, and I know that's silly, but in that scenario, what are you going to do?
Two things immediately.
All right.
The first thing is, in that situation, you remove the kid, right?
So you grab him.
No, you don't grab
You're
him.
leaving.
I mean, you're not like, yank him out, right? But you let them know, like, hey, this behavior doesn't stand. I'm going to remove you from the situation so that stimulus, whatever's happening in that moment, you can't continue to do because you are in public and you're interfering with that business, you're interfering with those other people. So you take them out and have, depending on the level of meltdown, can you have a conversation with them at that moment? Or are you literally just abandoning the grocery store for that hour or two, whatever? Could be happening. Two, the way that we always dealt with our son was he knew expectations before we walked into a grocery store.
Oh, we all get that speech.
No.
My son. Oh, okay.
But it was very clear with, this is what I expect from you. And if not, we are going to leave the store, which means there's no food in the house, which means you're not having dinner, right? There was the consequences piece, right? So there's a lot more than I'm just going to smack your butt if you don't do what I say. It's their brain being able to really start putting those puzzle pieces together of, this is my role in the world, and this is my people's expectations of me. When they know what's expected, they know how to behave. If you then hold them to that with very consistent consequences, they don't generally push back more than once or twice. But it's that consistency of consequence at the other end of it that also needs to happen.
Now, there's a huge demographic of people that would say, nope, spare the rod, spoil the child.
So how many times have you ever heard somebody, their kids yelling at them, and they're yelling back, stop yelling?
I don't live in that world.
But do you know
kids yelling at the parent?
Right. Or just yelling in general. They're yelling,
okay.
right?
Yeah.
And your response is stop yelling.
Yes.
Okay, but now I'm using that same tactic to yell at my kids. So what they're seeing and hearing is, but it's okay for you to yell, right? So it's very confusing for kids. Same thing with any sort of physical. If you're spanking me, if you're corporal, whatever you want to, with a rod, a switch, whatever you want to, right? And we all know how things happen. Chancla, depends on your, right? Whatever, however you grew up. Right. What you're saying is violence can be paired with something. If I'm angry at you, I can now use violence. If I'm frustrated with you, I can now use violence. That's not a message I want to send to a kid who's learning behaviors and consequences and outcomes.
So, and I'm just a little bit of devil's advocate, but I really want to understand. Mm-hmm. But what if the spanking is done for correction? There's no, I'm not doing it to be mean or to hurt you. It's to correct.
So anything that we do, and think about even as adults, right? Everything we do has to be paired with what makes sense. And this is where I think most of us make mistakes, right? So let's say, for example, we're going to go to the grocery store and I set up an expectation, right? This is what's expected. Here's the consequences. And then I say, if you don't do well in the grocery store, I'm going to take away your bike. The bike has nothing to do with the grocery store, right? And maybe in my head as an adult, I'm like, oh, the bike would be a consequence.
Because
and
you
the
love
kid's
the bike.
thinking, whatever, I'm gonna risk the bike
That's
because
interesting.
that doesn't make sense to me.
Right.
It doesn't mean anything. So it has to be, everything has to pair together. We've got to remember their little minds are very inside of the moment.
Can you give me an example? Like the grocery store, what would be a better consequence that relates to?
Sure. Yeah, that relates to it. So it can be something like what Jen said, right? Where if you've got a little bit of an older kid, where you can say, you know, the reason we're going to the grocery store is to get groceries. If I have to leave the grocery store and I'm unable to go back, then I don't have those groceries, which is then going to cause a consequence here. And sometimes those natural consequences.
You're going to talk to a 4-year-old like that?
Yes. Yeah, for sure. So never, ever underestimate a kid, even at 2 years old. So I have a 1-year-old, right? And he's himself.
You lay that?
He lives to the beat of his own drum. But the same expectation that I have of my 7-year-old is often the same expectation I have of my 1-year-old, but within what's comparable, right? So let's say I go to the store. I expect my 7-year-old to maybe participate and help me kind of walk alongside. I expect my 1-year-old to participate as well to what he's capable of, which is maybe just sitting there and hanging out. But a lot of it is we find ourselves in situations like that. And it's not a silly example, right? Because we see that kind of stuff all the time. And kids are impulsive and it's kind of fun to dump cereal on the floor, right?
Yeah,
so,
absolutely.
and that impulsiveness, like they're constantly fighting it. And quite frankly, as adults, we are too. Because sometimes I just want to dump cereal on the floor.
Right.
I mean, we don't really move away from that. We just change it because of social expectations. So if we're constantly like setting things up and reframing and letting people know what to expect, but let's say that example does happen, right? And we've set up expectations and we've already said, this is what I expect. And that happens, you do still have to walk away from it. And then you explain like why that wasn't why it was inappropriate. And I think that's some of the gap is that we're really good, and we've all fell into this of like, I said so, I'm the adult and that's why you should do it. And sometimes, and I've told my kids, sometimes I'm gonna say that because in the moment, that's all I can say. And later when I have an opportunity, I'll explain to you why I needed you to do something. But otherwise, they just kind of live forever thinking, okay, well, that's just they don't know why they're doing it. It's just so-and-so told me how to do it.
That's an interesting approach, and I didn't want to spend so much time on the spanking thing, but I do think that, you know, it's polarizing, right? You know, a lot of people that are going to say, hey, they spanked me or whooped me when I was little and did me good. You know, I got a few I didn't deserve, but I missed a bunch I probably did. So it's a wash, right? And I probably would be in that category as well. But I understand what you're saying about the fear thing. And so talk to me a little bit, and then we'll jump to something else. But because I think people have probably leaned in a little closer to their device right now. Give me some of the effects. Let's say somebody is raised in that environment and they're being spanked and through whatever, shoe, hand, belt, whatever, to varying degrees. How would that manifest later in adulthood, and the reason why you guys say it's not a good idea?
Do you want to take this? Do you want me to? Sure. Either way. So honestly, it's that same cause and effect, right? So you become very aware of your actions in a way that is not necessarily internalized. I want to do this or not do this because of myself, because I'm learning to not upset somebody else.
You mean as an adult?
As an adult. And a functioning adult.
This now becomes my rationale.
Right. So I'm in a relationship, and it's not, do I want to do this or not do this? It's, do I dare upset you? Is this going to upset you? How is that balance? Which, you know, on some level, I don't want to upset my partner or whatever, but I also need to do things for myself. And so not having that kind of strength or wherewithal to make those choices, you're creating very timid people. You're creating very dependent personalities.
And that's what I was going to jump to, Jen, is that the argument will be that's, and I'll say it, right? That's what's wrong with America now. People are too soft. You can't say anything. The kids are soft because we've gotten soft on them, and this, you've heard this, right? This is the narrative. And I hear it, in my world and in recruiting and, the fire service, things have changed, like you said. And I think that's a great point. It's not dogma, right? So it's modular. It can adjust. And I like that you said that, because I'm thinking, well, you went to school. There was a curriculum. People that went to school 10 years before you probably studied the same curriculum. Did it change? Have human beings changed? Right? Aren't we basically the same?
I think we've learned more about how the brain makes interactions. So usually when someone asks me in a class, right, like why have things changed, right? How do we suddenly know all these new things? And I usually go all the way back to when somebody's pregnant. So one of the things that we know now, because we have the research to prove it, is that whatever that mom is exposed to, that baby's exposed to as well. And that was a theory for a really long time. And then they finally got some good research, actually around 9/11.
So even like emotional stimuli, everything.
And once we finally got the research, and that's what I remind people, sometimes these ideas, they come from theories. They come from somebody sitting around like this talking and saying, I wonder if this is true. And then when we get research and we can prove it, that's when things start to change. And we've been able to do that. We've been able to, there's this idea of what we call infant mental health now.
Infant mental health.
It's this idea. So what Jen and I talk about is a lot of prevention, right? So part of why I love working with kids is because I'm getting in on the groundwork of stuff. I love working with adults too, but I'm having to combat years and years of stuff. Whereas with kids, you get in before that. Well, one of the things we know now, and this is actually a fairly new thing in the last 10 years or so, is that we go all the way backwards to infancy. And if we go all the way backwards to that, we actually have a greater opportunity to prevent things. And what this comes from is education to moms. There's lots of situations people find themselves in where they're like, no, my baby's fine. I went through all of this stuff, but my baby's fine. And maybe not. And there's lots of things we can do even if we know that a child's been exposed. We have all these cool interventions and these ideas of early intervention, right? So where I think it's changed is just that we can prove it now. Like we can prove that these things have an effect.
Okay, I see what you're saying.
Versus just thinking it.
Right. So, and to summarize that, because the spanking idea is, it's probably not a good idea because it will have long-term detrimental effects, right? And could follow you into adulthood in these unconscious ways, right, of interacting with people. And there's a better strategy, a better approach.
And there's also different ways of people doing that, right? If somebody's literally trying to hurt you, or lots and lots of every response is to spank, that's much different than somebody who is swatting to intervene on a behavior and then having a conversation afterwards.
Okay.
Right? There's a difference, a very big difference between those two, or somebody who's been spanked once or twice in their life, right?
Or what about when they say, run down that hill and go pick me out a switch for you?
Right.
You want me to choose my own torture device? That's
that's tough.
all right, so give me 3 concrete strategies that I can use, and that our viewers can use instead of spanking, like something concrete.
And so a couple things vary. One is the age of your kiddo, and
Let's say I got a 5-year-old.
Okay, and also
Does the gender matter?
No.
Okay.
Nope, not even a little. Their personality matters.
Okay.
How are they going to respond? Because you've got some kids so when I was growing up, it wasn't spanking, it was my dad's disappointment in me.
Sure.
And so his ability to convey that what I was going to do was disappointing. All he had to do, the 2 names, right? When your middle name's in there, it's like, ooh. So he would raise his voice, deepen his voice, and it was Jennifer Devon. And I would run to my room by myself. Like, I didn't even need. So conveying what you need to convey depends on the kid. So that's personality dependent. So if you've got a kid who's thinking a lot, a kid who wants to be kind of a perfectionist.
Let's just say I got a 5-year-old guy, and he's wild and breaking things and jumping off his stuff, and he just doesn't listen. He's just running around doing his own thing. So, and can you give me 3 strategies that our viewers now watching this are going to try? And instead of spanking, let's say, all right, let's put this stuff to the test and see if it holds water.
Cool. What's wrong? So I think the biggest thing is empowerment, right? So if my kid is jumping around, in that example, right, like jumping around, jumping off stuff, I got to figure out what's going on first, right? Is it just blatant disrespect for me? Maybe. Is it that like he should go jump on the trampoline? Possibly. So if we can figure out what they're lacking, we can often figure out what to do next. Same kind of thing with ourselves, right? And I'll just parent ourselves so it makes
But
sense.
I'm going to kind of number it. So let's see what they're lacking. Like,
Yeah, what are they looking for?
why are you doing this?
Yeah, what do you need? Kind of like, let's say I'm in the car, right? And I realize, oh, my head kind of hurts. And I take a second and realize, I haven't eaten all day. Okay, I could start there. I could take some Tylenol, but I could also probably eat and solve my problem, right? Or drink some water. Yeah, solve both those problems. So now it doesn't mean you walk up to your friend and you're like, what do you need, right? That's somewhere where the controversy is. And that doesn't, I mean, they're 5, so they're gonna, but you as the adult always have to be the one. You're the one that has to be calm, and you're the one that has to remember you're in charge. The second that we lose that and we go in with them, then who's in charge, right? Our kids are always looking for who's the adult.
So let's
That's
take
what
3
keeps us
seconds.
safe.
Breathe.
Yeah.
Right? Does that sound good?
Yep.
And then let's find out, all right, what do you need?
What's going on?
What's going on? And it may not be a direct question. I get that, right?
Right.
And then
But it's observing the situation.
observing the situation, like he's doing that for a reason. And then what? Where do I move on from there?
Once you can figure that out, then do that thing, right? If they're tired, then go to bed. If they've got energy they have to expel, and I'm a big advocate of exercise, and you don't have to be climbing mountains. You can just run around the house. You don't have to leave your house, quite frankly. You could make up a little maze, run to the kitchen door, go touch the counter. And if you start to see the body drop, then that's what they needed. And then usually it'll subside itself.
Okay.
And sometimes they're just overwhelmed. And I think one of the things we can be really, really good at as adults, and as well in what you guys do, is we just make it worse. We just make the overwhelming worse. So somebody's overwhelmed, there's a lot going on.
What do you mean we make it worse?
So for example,
Lights and sirens.
Voices. Sirens, right?
Big commanding bodies with lots of
Big
extra gear and face masks and.
Why do I feel like she's talking to me?
I don't know. But that's so much change. If I'm already scared about a situation or something's happening, or oh my gosh, I had to call 911 because something's happening chaotically in my house, and now all of that. Like when I'm cool and calm and there's a siren going by, you're like, yay, firemen. But when that's coming into my house, that's very overwhelming. Right? It's very So
you're saying it from the perspective of a service provider, right? I'm going to call them entering the home. And I think for the most part, most guys have the experience there. We're aware of it. And I think that even when because we teach in our classes, right? It's all about tone, and we understand the energy that we carry, and coming to a house, we want to kind of try to bring it down. And even physically, we might take a knee, and, or if I'm assessing the patient, I'd probably sit and talk like this as opposed to standing up with a group of guys at the door. I understand what you're saying, and that's great to consider. And I was also thinking about just the lay person, mom at home, who's quick to react, because it's a quick solution. Pop him on the butt, right? Maybe education might change some of that. If you knew there were alternatives, you might use those alternatives. Right?
I think 100%. Part of what gets us as parents, as providers, whatever, is we don't think we get overwhelmed, and we don't think we have a choice. And so we use what we have in the moment. That's why I'm a huge advocate for education, because what we know yesterday, if we know something different today, we're pretty likely to put that into action. If we don't know it, we never do anything different because we don't have a reason to do anything different.
That's a great point.
Not to make us simplistic, but we kind of are.
Well,
right?
No, I think that's a great point. I hope that people hear that and really take that into consideration. So, and now, like I said, we wanted to start broad, and I want to kind of narrow down to something. And this is, personally, but I've had conversations with people. A lot of times, I think socially, we hear things and we understand what things mean just based on how other people have referred to them, right? So specifically autism, right? You hear so much. And I don't know how many people are doing actual research and reading books, or is it just conversations and, oh, my friend said this about autism, so that must be true. Is it genetic? What is it? Can I get it from the vaccine? So can we talk a little bit about this? Because I want to understand it, and I think probably some of the audience. So to start with, what is autism? What is it?
it's a neurocognitive disease. So that just means it's in your brain.
So
Right?
it's an actual disease.
Yes.
Okay. It's neurocognitive, and it's to me it seems vague.
It is. It's a very
is.
large collection
Okay.
of symptoms, of behaviors. There's a, when you look at
Are
the
there any core symptoms or behaviors?
yes and no, because you can have, 6 of 10. You can have, 10 of 10.
Can you name a few just to?
I'm going to let.
We think we've seen
Yeah.
it, and now people are diagnosing other people.
Right.
Oh, he must be
Oh.
autistic. Oh, he's on the spectrum. Like
Yeah,
you,
which
you
is
hear
so
that.
frustrating. And that's the other, just real quickly, there used to be something called Asperger's, right? And now they've taken away Asperger's.
Oh, that's gone now.
And now they've lumped that into part of the autism spectrum.
That's on the spectrum now.
Right. So
That spectrum is growing.
the spectrum is growing. And so you've got, mild, moderate, severe, profound.
Mild, moderate, severe, profound. Okay.
Right. So you've got all of these levels. You've got from people who are very high functioning, very high vocabulary, all of that, all the way to very extreme deficits. And so to add Asperger's, which had some very different symptoms and categories, I think is even more confusing, right? Because now let's just throw it all in one pot. It makes it tougher to, even for experts to diagnose, but for the average person to say, oh, that's autism now too? Oh, crap. I don't know what that
And
means.
that's probably what our viewers now are going to say. Oh, great, another one. All right,
Yeah.
let me back it
Yep.
up a little bit. So, because I didn't give you a chance to answer.
Yep.
It's a disease.
Right.
How does one acquire this? Is it you're born with it? Can it develop later in life when you're 7 years old?
So for the most part, they're finding a lot of genetic ties to it.
So it can be genetic.
Yeah, so they've got enough research now to say that there's genetic ties to it. Like anything, when it comes to infection or injury, that can cause a problem. But what we found about autism, if we look at it from what we call strengths-based, meaning that neurologically people with autistic characteristics tend to neurologically fire a little bit faster than those of us without it.
What does that mean in layman's terms?
Sure. So what it means is that the messages that I receive, the rate at which it goes, is slower than somebody who has autism. So it's going to be faster, and their connections are faster.
Their brain
that makes it
messaging.
seem like they're
Yes.
smarter.
They, in a lot of ways,
In
they
a lot
are.
of ways, they can be. So even if you have somebody like what Jen's talking about, right? We've got these different ways that it's categorized. Even if you have somebody who say is pretty severe. So profound usually often means that they don't have, maybe they can't talk, there's speech delays and things like that. But let's say somebody's severe. They may have a fascination about a particular thing that would blow any of us out of the water. So they may be able to tell you every single president that there ever was and everything about that, right? But they may struggle to tie their shoes. They may struggle to interact with friends.
Now, people are going to relate back to that movie Rain Man, right? Is that kind of, I know it's exaggerated on the movie, but that kind of thing where he remembers these profound things, numbers and patterns that other people wouldn't be able to see.
Right, and the idea is that the way that their brain can hold that information and then expand on it is different than those of us whose brains don't do that. Is kind of the incredibly simplistic way to explain autism.
Well, I think that's the way to start, right?
Right.
Because otherwise, at least to gain some clarity. So, okay, so there can be a genetic component. Now, let's say parents out here who maybe they have a child and people would say, well, that kid's odd, right? But he's not been diagnosed. And the parent may be thinking, and I'm just playing a little bit of devil's advocate, can it be cured? Is there treatment for autism?
So those are two different things. So there is lots of treatment.
Yeah, you're right.
And as far as it being, so again, when we look at autism, if we think about from the strengths base, there's no reason to cure it. It isn't something that needs to be cured, in a sense, if that makes sense. So if I operate in the world,
what do you mean it isn't something that needs to be cured?
like there's nothing wrong with it, in a sense. So we don't have to, we can teach somebody how, okay, let me use this example. Language, right? Let's say that my first language is English, which it is. And let's say I want to learn another language. There's nothing wrong with English. I just want to learn Spanish. So I'm not going to take away what I know about English and say, well, that's wrong. I probably shouldn't do that. I'm just going to add more to that. It's kind of what we think about autism. So I don't necessarily need to change the way. I just need to help them learn a little bit how to adapt to the fact that other people don't see the world like that.
That's an interesting point. I'm really glad you said that. And I'm just, I guess I'm picturing, a parent out there who may be frustrated. Maybe the child's having social problems, and, maybe some of the clumsy ways as parents we deal with things sometimes. It'd be so much easier if you were just normal, right? Without the understanding of what you just said, which was beautiful, by the way. I appreciate that. All right, so we don't need to cure it because it doesn't need to be cured, right? But you did mention it can be treated. So what do treatments look like, or a treatment?
Yeah, so usually for most people, what we know now about it is we like kids to get diagnosed pretty early. And that's a fairly new idea. Not that adults can't get diagnosed, because you absolutely can as an adult. But if you get diagnosed, it's a long process. Usually people have to, I remind parents, you have to qualify to even be diagnosed with autism. And there's some misconception around that. So there's a lot of things that they look at. They look at how do they interact at school or daycare, or if they're not in those things with a family member. And then you go through all of these screening process, and they're looking at all of these different areas of intellect, of speech, and then after that, let's say that somebody is functioning pretty well, but there's a bit of a speech delay, which is pretty frequent in someone with autism, whether it's a lisp or struggling on a certain word, or in general just they don't speak at all. So there's speech therapies that are usually pretty effective. And then there's, lots of occupational therapy. Equine therapy, which is with horses, is becoming kind of big in that community.
Really?
Water, which I just had a fascinating conversation the other day with someone about water in autism, because most people with autism really like water, but not necessarily the shower, because water, think about being in a pool,
It's
right?
immersive.
Oh, it feels amazing. It's super immersive. And so that idea, right, of feeling all of your senses, some of what we know, most people with autism, their senses are just heightened, right? So if you touch or hug somebody or get in a pool, that actually could feel really good as long as I know you're doing it. And so some of that is also teaching them how to take how overwhelmed they get with the sensory and interact into the world. And
What's an interesting point when you said that? I just recently, I'm a little slow, I learned about weighted blankets.
yeah.
They're
So
amazing.
We bought one, and I get it. I understand that, but you never would think that, that sensation of it's kind of like that hug you talked about. I think that's what it's for, right? And that's why it's popular. The weight of it, it's soothing psychologically. So, okay, now I'm a parent, and when would I know why do parents bring their children in to be assessed for autism?
So when you have a young child, every time you go to the doctor for your checkups, they have developmental milestones that they're asking, right? Are you walking? Are you crawling? Are you talking? Are your teeth popping out? Are you pinch or grasp? All of those things. And when we start to see delays or lack thereof of any of these milestones, we start to get concerned for autism or a variety of potential diagnoses. And so that is one of the ways that we start to find some concern.
Is that by referral, or are the parents just
it can be
electing
both.
to?
I mean, on a regular basis, you're taking your kid for checkup, right? Sure. So it can be your doctor noticing like, hey, they're kind of falling behind on a number of things. It can be a proactive parent noticing, especially if they either have had other children or they're in daycare. Or they've got cousins or whomever, they can kind of compare that the milestones are not being met at the same rate. Okay. And then, or that it's completely different, right? Yeah. So if I've got 3 kiddos and they all kind of have gone through things similarly, and now I've got a kid who loves to play cars, but will only set up the car setup the same way that it is on the box. That's very different from a creative play standpoint of what I'm expecting a 2-year-old, 2.5-year-old to go through, right? So when I start seeing 2 or 3 or 4 of these differences, it may start triggering some questions for a parent.
Okay, then those are great points. I appreciate that. So yeah, we need to get more education right, on autism and just understanding what that is and figuring things out. And we're trying to kind of wind it down a little bit. Our time's getting low, but I did want to speak a little bit, and from a provider point of view, a little bit about child abuse. And it's been talked about, and we do CEs all the time. We hear about this, but I kind of wanted to talk a little bit about. I'm entering homes, right? And what are some things as a provider, service provider, that I should be looking for? Signs of abuse. We know the classic ones, but what are some things that maybe we're not aware of? That could be subtle signs, and these things we should take note of. If there are any,
right?
I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, when you're talking about like the classic signs, right? I mean, obviously you see physical signs of abuse. That's always one, right? But anytime you see somebody who is not making your gaze, or a kiddo who ducks when you're making a sudden movement, or is afraid of or checking in with a parent constantly in a way that doesn't seem natural.
Gotcha.
Those are things to me that really kind of trigger a fear that isn't typical in a home. And so one of the things we were talking about earlier is that it can also be in any type of home. There's no.
So poverty is not an indication
Poverty is not
of
an
abuse.
issue. Socioeconomic status is absolutely not an indicator.
So maybe not living in the best home, or
yeah, if your home is dirty, if you've got dishes in the sink, that has nothing to do with whether or not you love your kid or you're going to hurt
sometimes
your kid.
people may jump to those conclusions and
Right.
judge, right, based on something like that. And for PSPG, I know we talked about it before, but tell us a little bit about, as we close here, the services that you guys offer.
So we are first responder priority, pretty much only, and their families. So we see folks for counseling, we do training, and we do debriefings after critical incidents, anything along those lines. We see about 100 or contracts with about 140 different agencies in Southwest and local, state, federal agencies. And then we have a couple of things where we work with kids.
Okay, yeah, I was going to ask you that because your early childhood development stuff, that's separate from,
right,
obviously.
Right. So we have a grant through the county where we do prevention intervention classes with middle schools throughout the county. And so Bailey and I teach a ton of classes.
Is that some of the preventative stuff you were talking about earlier? Okay. And so you guys, and how many children you told me earlier that you guys?
So we're now, at the end of this semester, we'll be at over 10,000 kids that we've serviced in the last decade or so. And they're 12-week-long classes, so they're not one and done sessions.
10,000.
Yeah.
That is so impressive. And have you been able to track these kids, like the ones that went through 10 years ago? So where are they now?
Yeah, I wish we could. That was part of our grant that we weren't allowed to officially track them, but it's really fun to just kind of see them.
Do you run into them?
We do, because it's Albuquerque, right? It's the biggest small town there is.
Right.
And so I know, because sometimes they'll be like, Miss! I'm like, oh, nobody calls me Miss except if they're an all-star student. And so, it's amazing to see them like as adults. And I always tell them, if we always want to see you as adults. We don't want to see you when we work in jails or anything along those lines, right? But in the public, always come see us. And so it's kind of cool to see them. And
these are, one thing about these podcasts that gets frustrating is we have these time constraints. But once we get rolling and we're really having a great conversation, and there's so much more, like the autism piece, I want to do more on that. So would you guys agree to come back? And we can kind of focus just on that, because I think it's worth gaining the understanding, right? And really dispelling some of the rumors. But other than that, we appreciate your time once again coming in and talking to us about child behavioral interventions. And for everyone out there, thank you for watching the video. Please like, hit the notification bell, subscribe to our channel. And to all you service providers out there, we thank you for your service, and be safe.